I find myself being better at time management. Last time it's just about work. There's not much life involved. And then that got into a much better place. But also the temperament that I have at work, because the kids, you got to be very patient with them,
Right.
right?
Welcome to Brave. Learn from Southeast Asia's best tech leaders. Build the future, learn from our past, and stay human in between. No BS on success. I'm Jeremy Au, venture capitalist, serial founder, Harvard MBA, science fiction nerd, and dad of 2 daughters. Every week, we debate startup news, interview changemakers, answer listener questions, and share personal insights. Join our movement of over 40,000 members and get transcripts, resources, and community at www.bravesea.com. Stay well and stay brave.
Hey, I'm really excited to have you on the show after 3 long years.
That's right. It's been a while.
I think at the time we were recording, I think it was like voice only and it was online. So it's just nice to kind of like be in person and I don't know, have a sequel episode.
Yeah, really excited. When you reached out to me about it, I was like, has it really been 3 years? So much things happened.
I know, right? It was like the pandemic, we survived it. Congratulations. And then obviously we continue growing in business a lot. There's obviously a lot of there was a war, still a war. And then now there's the tariffs. So lots of different things. So I think we would love to do actually, a reflection about what you've learned over the past few years and also how things are changing as well for you in the business as well. So I guess the first question is, could you introduce yourself real quick? Yeah.
Yeah, so my name is Jackson. I'm the founder of Mighty Jaxx. So what we do is that we create collectibles and we deliver them to over 80 countries of collectors. You would find them in stores like Toys R Us, Miniso, Hot Topic, depending on which region. And the partners we work with are like Warner Brothers, Disney, Nickelodeon, and we use the IPs that I grew up with and the younger gen grew up with and create a unique collectibles and toys out of it.
Amazing.
What we do.
So I guess the curious thing is like, you said that things have changed a lot over the past few years, right? So what do you think have been some of the things that from your perspective, have changed over the past few years from your perspective?
Well, I think the macro situation
Yeah.
of everything really helps to educate me in what kind of leadership and North Star that we really want to be, where we want to go. And in the last 3 years, like I think it was the first downturn that I ever experienced in my entrepreneurship journey, because I started in 2012. So that was a little bit down, but it's not that bad, right? And then the last 1.5 years or 2 years ago, it got really bad with all the things that's happening. And that really shine, a new reality on how companies will need to do to survive this period.
So it's interesting because it shone a light on how you lead. How have you, I guess, changed as a leader over the past few years?
Well, when we think about if we can create a painting of how I usually am leading a team, usually I'm the balloon. And then my team is the house or the anchor that helps me, rein in a little bit because I'm a dreamer by nature.
Right.
And so when we go on a path of creating new verticals or want to do some exploration, I tend to go all out and get that first proof of concept out while taking care of the core business as well. However, I think when the reality, sort of, get more apparent, over the last 1.5 years, I have to be a little bit more cautious and prudent in a way to test out new theories, right? But before that, it was like, venture money and all that. You could just, okay, I'm just going to do it and let's see if it works. But now it's a way more calculated method of looking at it, if it makes sense.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And so what's interesting is that obviously I myself have felt like I've had to become more calculated as well, right? Because when things were going well, I think you can just explore. But now it feels like there's a lot of not only tough times, but also uncertain times, right? Things keep changing along the way, right? Because I think during these few years, not only have we have the recession several years ago from inflation driven by the war, but we also had AI, we also had the tariffs as well. I'm just kind of curious, do you see like, do you read the news more often now?
Oh man, I read all kinds of news every day, any point of the day. Just moving so fast, especially the last 2 weeks, it's ridiculous to think that it could actually operate on a global level in such an agile manner, if you put it that way. It's almost spontaneous in
Yeah.
the way that something happened.
Yeah.
Usually through a tweet.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's a tweet, right? So back in the days, like, I don't know, business owners like wake up in the morning, they open the Straits Times. It's like, oh, the economy is changing. Okay, I better,
Too late.
it's too late.
Sorry, that's funny.
No, and I think it's interesting because you're doing this for the collectibles business, right? Which is, I think, to me, is interesting because even for myself, I'm one of those people who don't understand collectibles very well. So but to me, it feels like it's different businesses, right? One is it's obviously a luxury, it's affordable luxury, it's a hobby that obviously people have. That's one, so it's part of their dreams or aspirations. I would say that's one, and two, of course, there's a sort of physicality of it, like the goods component, and also there's also interesting. There's a community part of it, right? People discuss and talk about it, and obviously that applies for different things, right? You could be with those three things, you could become a video gamer, you could be enjoying hockey,
Yeah.
but collectibles. I'm just kind of curious. So how do you think about? I guess for those who don't understand collectibles, how do you normally kind of explain collectibles as a community or hobby? Yeah.
I think when the idea of collectibles started way long ago,
Right.
80 years ago maybe,
Yeah.
and any kind of thing is a collectible,
Yeah.
right? Watches, plates, or
Yeah.
any all kind of random stuff. But because the information flows so much right now, and
Yeah.
we're all so connected with everyone around the world,
Yeah.
you begin to realize that a very niche passion or joy of yours is suddenly not quite niche.
Yeah.
And turns out there's like, I don't know, a million people that loves tasting different kind of hot dogs or whatever, And so through that, this little community start building. And toys is one of those, collectible toys are one of those that are, like a breakout category in that sense.
Yeah.
Especially recently, the last 2 years, you see a lot of celebrities, usually the newer generation of stars or KOLs that are really into collectibles.
Yeah.
And so as you express that through any form of media, then, they influence the way that, when you're like, when 30 years ago, maybe you collect like poor cha, right? Like poor tea or whatever, and that is your collectible. But now it's, whether it's shoes, whether it's toys, it takes on a different form.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, for these key opinion leaders, obviously quite interesting because it's also driving that wave. I mean, I have to admit, as one of those like nerdy people, I've always loved, like have like the Warhammer 40,000, some of that dystopian.
My God.
And I also listen to Dungeons and Dragons, like, those table games as a way to like, I don't know, background, conversation, people having fun. So yeah, it's a niche thing that most people in my workplace would be like, what? Dungeons and Dragons, like science fiction. I was like, but yeah, it's something that's become more, international and, But I think what's interesting is that, how does like a hobby like that translate to collectibles, right? I mean, because a lot of these, communities, shouldn't they, for example, stay purely digital? Why is there a need to make it into like a physical good that is in a store for discovery? Like, like why not just keep it all online? I'm just kind of curious. Yeah.
Well, that's the thing that has to be answered in a way that, the human psyche or the human nature of things wants, right? Like with everything, we like to own things. Yeah. Whether it's a digital or physical, right? We like to own things.
Yeah.
And at least I would think that physical object or representation of a design or something that's creative IP that you want to have displayed anywhere in the world or anywhere in your home, it really helps you be in the environment, right? Now, if it's digital, of course, it's kind of hard to have that tactile feel of things. And I think there's one thing that's never going to go away. It's a similar thing. I think maybe not the best example, but like LPs, like vinyl record, right? Spotify, it's one of those things.
No, I think there's a really good, I like the idea of ownership and physicality, right? So what are the kind of personas of the people who buy collectibles? Is it like, I guess somebody who's like a hobbyist? Is it somebody who's like an investor? Like what are the kind of personas that you think are the kind of people who buy collectibles from your perspective?
Yeah, where collectibles and toys in particular, it's really hard to blanket them into a certain group of people because usually that would mean they have a certain need that needs to be addressed, right? But in this case, it's not quite so. And on both extreme ends, you have so-called the larger population where the idea of owning a collectible, having it on your work desk or at home, it is already almost like a habitual and lifestyle type of thing, right? So to them, it's about buying like more affordable 10 US, 20 US dollars type of item, and be able to amass like the full collection in that way. So these are very general sort of group of demographic, right? So usually they are like 18 to 25 years old. So you might be interested to know that 70% of them are actually female that's driving this purchase. Now, if you talk about 20 years ago, 15 years ago, collectible toys, usually 80%, 90% are male dominated, right?
Yeah.
Star Wars, Star Trek, stuff like that. And on the other end of the spectrum, you have very mature buyers who has been in this for a very long time. And they are the core fans who would spend upwards of 10 grand a year, 20 grand a year just to get their collectibles. And often they come from all walks of life. Like there isn't
Yeah.
a particular,
Yeah.
stream.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's interesting because, I think even for myself, I always, feel like, I want to buy some collectibles from time to time as well. And I was recently looking at my workplace, work setup. And I was like, oh, I'm reading Marie Kondo. They have a new book called Joy at Work. So it's talking about, reconfiguring your desk and for items that bring you joy. And I'm like, okay, I should put a photo frame of my family, because, otherwise the desk is very like, utilitarian, right? And I think it's interesting because you say something about, how it's like an affordable kind of like joy, right? Or luxury here. And I think it's interesting because obviously there are very big luxuries. I don't know, like, I guess a vacation would be a very big luxury, right? A vacation experiential. When you talk about, I'm kind of curious, like, what do you think are the emotions or the experiences that a collectible brings for somebody and explain that for somebody who, who may not necessarily understand collectible. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, really, like a lot of this thinking that a collector would have usually stems from, your childhood, right? You consume all kinds of content.
Right.
It could be SpongeBob, it could be whatever. And through this journey, one particular case could be that you never could buy the item that you wanted,
Right.
Because you don't have disposable income.
Yeah.
So naturally, as you got into that stage of your life, you want to purchase something that reminds you of a time which is much more simpler
Yeah.
and brings you joy in its purest form. And that could possibly mean a figurine or a toy like that. So that's one particular segment of consumers, I would say.
That's interesting. I mean, I think I'm a parent of a 4-year-old and 2-year-old, and actually one of the fun parts has been buying toys for them that I would have enjoyed if I had them in the past.
Oh my god.
So it's like, like a Pikachu. Because I enjoy Pokemon, but obviously, I was on Pokemon Red, but I had a Pikachu as my main, I started out with child and stuff.
I would sometimes argue with my kids to influence them to buy a certain character instead of the character that they choose because I like it more.
Yeah, that's true, right? How old are your kids now?
They are 5 and 3.
Yeah. I think there's also been a big change over the past few years, right? Those 3 years. How do you think you've changed as a person? I mean, now you're like a dad, fully a dad, I guess.
Yeah, 5 years experience.
5 years experience, it's like job experience. So 5 years experience, you're hired, right? So how has being a dad kind of like changed you from your perspective? Yeah.
Actually, I find myself being better at time management. Last time it's just about work. There's not much life involved. And then that got into a much better place. But also the temperament that I have at work, because the kids, you got to be very patient with them, right? And that actually helps me to either, own certain things that otherwise I would have knee-jerk effect or anything like that.
Yeah.
And so that's one that was very, very helpful in that. But I find myself, as you mentioned, like buying toys, educational stuff for kids. Most parents would want the best possible, right? Which does not necessarily mean most expensive or anything like that. And so because we want the best for them, the sort of budget they set aside for it can be quite, right? And that got me thinking about edutainment side of things.
Yeah.
What will my kid want to have? Does this engage them? So we're actually building something along that line. Is outside from like all the collectible toy side. And I got the kids to come and test the product, and it's very fun. Like it helps me broaden my thoughts a little bit more.
I mean, it makes a lot of sense, right? I mean, for every parent, they like to share with their children what brought them joy in their own childhood, right? So to some extent, Pokemon brought me happiness. So when my kids want to talk about Pokemon, I'm like, okay, like I'm not against it. I'm not super for it, but I'm like mildly favorable, right? As an indulgent dad who can provide,
Yeah, that's a struggle. That's a struggle.
That is the part, right?
Yeah.
No, I think it's interesting. And I think obviously what's interesting is, like you said, it's interesting about to see the demographics have changed, because I think 20 years ago, I think even when I was like a teenager, the idea of collectibles, and obviously I was part of the gaming group, and we would, read comics together and stuff like that as well. But obviously, collectibles was always like you said, probably Neil, very very into it. And that was interesting to see, like you said, the mainstreaming of it, right? You know, like you said, it's more women, it's younger people, and I think all of us also, I guess, us millennials are also becoming parents as well, right? So there's an interesting angle about it. How do you think the shape of collectibles as a result, or the art of collecting, will change, over time? Because we've seen it change so much over the past 20 years. And now I'm just kind of curious, while you look at the next 20 years, what do you think are some of the aspects do you think are part of that change?
Well, when I started collecting, it's still in a very niche form. What I'm talking about is like designer collectibles. Like those are very, very niche when I started, right? Maybe like 15 years ago. But of course, now as we can see on a lot of different forms of media, like the idea of designer collectibles are quite mainstream. Then you have some of the more heritage ones, like you mentioned comic, right? Look how far comic.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
It's unthinkable that
Yeah.
20 years ago that it could become a billion-dollar blockbuster franchise
Yeah.
in that way. And so this whole conversation is really about the future of IP, right? Where is it going to come from, and how can we see it today? Even for Dungeons and Dragons, right? D&D went into movie, went into all kinds of stuff. Even spin-offs from D&D, like Dungeon Master, Matt Mercer and stuff like that became
Yeah.
superstar in their own right.
Amazing. Yeah, quite a bit.
How incredible is that? They even
Yeah.
have their own animation in Amazon and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So collectibles, where it's going, it has been rock solid and ever booming. We talk about cards, we talk about shoes, and it will continue to go on an upward trend.
Yeah.
And now for toys to come in that manner, beyond the retro toys, the new age of toys will form to become the new IP of tomorrow.
No, I think it's interesting what you talk about IP, because it's a bit of evolution, right? Like if I go back in time, I always remember, like, my friend made me watch Evangelion, that's like, and then I got into it, and then, but I mean, not so into it as him. And then, of course, over time, I was like, okay, I was into Star Wars. Obviously, I wanted a Lego Star Wars, the Millennium Falcon,
It's so expensive.
so expensive. Yeah, it's like they're making more and more advanced versions of that. So it's just like, and I'm like, where would I store it, and so forth. So, but that was like for a long time, like my bucket list item to buy, right? You can call it a collectible, or at least a toy for display. And then obviously now, like Dungeons and Dragons, I think my wife recently watched Dungeons and Dragons. I don't think she's ever played Dungeons and Dragons, but I was like, having a conversation about what to watch. There's a Dungeons and Dragons movie.
That was pretty
I'm more into it. She really
movie
enjoyed
was
it.
pretty
She laughed.
Yeah.
There was some really good jokes. She enjoyed it, and to her, I don't know. I guess I was a missionary evangelizing Dungeons and Dragons to my wife, right? So it's interesting, like you said, to see that expansion. So I guess one thing you're saying is, are you saying that you believe that IP will continue to grow more, like more comics, more stories? Is that what you're saying, or?
Well, I want to share a little bit about the IP side, because it is the genesis of everything, right? Toys and games, they're all subset of an IP. And if we look at how the NFT situation is, when during the good times, it's interesting because Disney took decades to go from a media content to consumer products, and then became a massive IP. But if you look at Bob Apes or CryptoPunks or anything like that, they took literally days to go the other way around, where they become popularized in such a way, right? So the time it takes to create a legacy IP, potentially, it could be much shorter in the future.
Right.
And then that will shape culturally, what people consume. Because even at our age, when we watched the D&D movie, it was really exciting. After that, I went to play a short campaign with my friends. So I couldn't take it. I wanted to play. My point is that when you have the younger generation watching it, then that already defines the path forward for them.
Right.
So powerful.
Yeah, powerful stuff. So I think it's interesting because I think you also implied something else, which is not only new IP, which is new IP brands, but also new channels, right? Because Dungeons and Dragons used to be an in-person thing. Now it's a movie, it's anime, which I confess I've watched on Amazon Prime. I was like, that dude watching it by myself. Because I was like, the movie I knew my wife could get in, but I was like, this animated version, I was like, like, oh, it's only me watching. Anyway, but I think what I say, I also think it's like multi-channel. I want to call it multi-format. Is I think also a big part of it, right? Like I think only in the past it was only Disney that could go from, movie to figurine to theme park. Now it feels like everybody's trying to do all the channels simultaneously.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how do you see that continue to change as well? Like, for, do you think that means like for collectibles, does it mean like more fragmentation or more niche types of products, or does it mean like different price points? How do you see that?
So this is a good point to touch on, because for us, we actually have products from 5 US all the way to 20,000 US. So you get like little sachets collectibles, you
Right.
get like blind boxes, which is all the rave right now. You have larger pieces than blind boxes, all the way couple hundred US type of thing. Artistic pieces, as well as statues, half a meter tall, life size type statues. So I like to see this as a collecting like a journey,
Right.
right? So as you progress in life, so that's the things that you would want to either enlarge in size or be more limited, so that you're the one of 200 only people in the world that collect them. So I think collecting is part of a life's journey if you're into that hobby, and that will only get deeper as you mature in life.
Yeah. I think what's interesting as well is that, do you also feel like it's getting more niche as well? Like, do you have to do more like, I don't know, call it product lines or IP types, And I guess with AI coming, there could be like a million IPs. So I'm just kind of curious how you think about that.
There usually it's like just like in fashion, there usually it's a certain look and genre of feel, flavor of the month. It's usually about 6 months, 9 months period, and then
Right.
that get shift quite a little
Yeah.
bit. And so it's just having the pulse on the game. Like, of course, I'm not the one, because I grew up with like punk rock, and I'm still listening to Blink-182 and watch Bleach a lot. I'm pretty stuck in that era. So I'm not the best person to like, okay, let's do this, right?
Yeah.
But the younger gen, like especially the 20 something or younger in our office, would usually come up with ideas based off their peers and what is the next hottest, anime or next hottest IP.
Yeah.
And that was very helpful, because most of the time I'll tell you this, I look at it, I'm like, are you sure someone's gonna like this? Like, and they're like, this is the hottest thing ever. I'm like, all right, I'll believe you. I have no authority in like verifying it, but I take your word for it.
So how do you stay in touch with the pulse? Because, obviously you don't want to become that elderly 70-year-old person who's like, waving your walking stick saying like,
Right.
you should
Right.
listen to the good old, 2000s, I guess. So how do you stay in touch with the pulse of the pop? Or especially because it's like moving so quickly as well.
I think there are two ways to do it, right? One is tangible and one is intangible, right? The tangible part of it, it's in numbers. So when you work with any kind of IP companies, whether is it Toei Animation or Crunchyroll, anything like that, you would get feedback like what are the type of skills that's coming out for this property in the next 6 months, for example. And then they will give you certain highlights like, oh, this is pretty hot and sentiment is quite strong, things like that. Those are all very helpful, but I think those are, by the time you hear about that, it's you're kind of late to the party a little bit. And then the intangible part is honestly with people, because if I usually for design sort of approval, we have like 5 to 10 people in a room, and they're all creatives, all younger than me. And sometimes I find myself, no, this is not gonna work, and the whole room just stood up in protest, and that gives a very strong indication of what's coming up.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting, because so you're not really part of the taste group, but you have to be in a careful way to not veto the creatives who are feeding you the reality.
Or the brand won't be able to evolve as time go by, and you'll be forever be stuck in my image. But that's not why I want to start a company.
Yeah, like a Blink-182 collectibles only group. And I think what's interesting as well is that you also have a production side as well, right? Because there's a physicality of the collectible. So it's not just obviously you have a creative house where you're identifying the current taste and the upcoming taste, but also you got to make a decision about go, no go for production in the collectibles. So how does that work? What does it make? I don't know. What does it make to create or manufacture a collectible that works for your group?
Well, in the very first form, it happens in like concept art, so it's all 2D, right? Images, and those images are or concept come out from the artists that we have in the company. And then it goes to the channels that we have in US, North America, this UK, Europe side of things, as well as Asia and China and Greater China. So different offices will get feedback will feedback on the designs. And once that clears the final round, it goes into prototyping, right? Getting the 3D done, the 3D printing of the items, look at it as a whole, how it looks uniform, after which it goes into actual mass production, which the whole thing takes like 6 months for the
Right. So it's interesting because there's that time lag as well. So how do you, I mean, avoid missing the boat? Okay, imagine like you take design and then you understand the taste and then you go, no go. I mean, how long would that take? And then, like you said, I think you started mentioning about the production. How long does it take from there all the way to reaching the shop, I guess? And after that, you do marketing to say it's available as well.
Yeah, you know the game.
So I'm just kind of curious, like, what does the time frames look like and how do you avoid missing the boat?
So there's two categories, right? One is artists. For artists, their longevity is much more further, right?
Right.
It's much more longer because it's not on a particular
Right.
milestone,
Right.
right? So those are generally just earmarking like who are the artists that we will want to develop more with, stuff like that. So it's quite easy in that way. The more time sensitive part is probably like the IPs that we work with, like especially big IPs. For example, like DC Comics. Right? Now, you might be interested to know is that once you want to endeavor on something like that, the licensor or the principal themselves, so in this case Warner Brothers, would then share with you, what does the roadmap looks like, what movies are coming out,
Right.
so you can time it accordingly.
Right.
So that helps a lot.
Yeah.
Right? Now the other one is the operational excellence in terms of supply chain. Right. Most of much larger companies, as expected, their turnaround time on production is actually 1.5 years or so, if not longer. So at this point, they would have probably planned out the next 3 years of products with little or no margin of change. Right? For us, we work a little bit differently. We react to market sentiment, so we would quickly put in something, get it out in 3 months, since we're still relatively small in size.
Yeah.
So that's how we position a little bit as a David Goliath type of situation.
Yeah. Really interesting to hear the agility as well, because that lets you move faster as well. I'm kind of curious whether, AI is changing that, because, some people are saying like, hey, AI improves agility. I mean, for example, would AI help you shorten that process, different stages? Does it make it more efficient? I'm just kind of curious, how is that changing?
So this has a very profound impact on both the industry and also academia, right? So I sit on board School of Design's advisory committees, and AI is something that is hotly debated, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
And the way I see it, the whole picture, and this is aside from my own personal sentiments, is that the truth is the industry would have to utilize it. If not, they already been utilizing it for at least the last 2-3 years. Whether is it creating short form content or animation or just generally concept artwork, anything that can be shortened will be shortened with the use of AI. Now the morality, the moral issue aside, there are a lot of debate going on, so I won't touch that. The moral issue aside, the truth is whether you like it or not, it's here to stay. It's here to, above all, empower you to create your concepts into reality in a much shorter time. And that's why I think AI is already heavily utilized across all kinds of creative industries.
Yeah. I mean, even for us, as a podcast, we're using it to do transcription. We're using it to extract the short videos. It's helping us shorten our editing process. So, the number of man hours per episode has gone down by an order of magnitude, right? So I think it's quite interesting to see that happening as well. How has that, for example, happening? Do you find, for example, in AI, like say, the artist side, does it make them faster at generating stuff, or do they generate more concepts? How does that impact the artist room from your perspective? Yeah.
I think what the artists or creatives always have is ideation, right? That is the genesis of any form of thing that will come from that. The only question is, what kind of tool are you going to use to visualize it or create it? In which case, for us, when we want to think about quick concepts just to understand something, if it works, then of course prompting will take like a couple of minutes to figure out whether it's a direction we want to go or not. Of course, we don't take it wholesale and just create products out of it, because that wouldn't be any fun, quite honestly. Like we want to create our own things, right? But I can imagine that in many ways, it's AI just quickens some processes that we have always done so in the past. If you're a writer and you have a beautiful concept, you could start writing something, or you could have a ghostwriter to do something. But in this case, AI could help you fast track that, right? And to prove a concept. So if it becomes successful, like, whatever, like Harry Potter or something that's really successful, then would that bother you from enjoying the content? Honestly, I don't think so. So this is I feel it's a little bit of a purist sort of mindset, like analog photography. It's like, the true photography. But digital, you could shoot 10,000 photos and maybe one of them is good, so it's not quite fair. That kind of conversation.
It's funny when you say it that way, because that's like definitely the debate like 20 years ago.
Right.
And I think 10 years ago it was about the digital cameras for movies versus, traditional cameras, and obviously. And so I think that's an interesting dynamic, obviously, today for AI side as well. And I think it's interesting because, you mentioned about copyright, about speed. So I thought what was interesting was that, this morning I was watching anime video. It was a parody or satire video, and the anime was called Maga, MAGA, so Make America Great Again. And it showed like kind of like a Studio Ghibli version, of what it would be like to put an anime of Trump's story from the assassination attempt to winning the elections to the tariff war. So, and it was interesting because I think the timeline for him generating like a 5-minute video, which was really funny, went viral on YouTube, and all the comments were very positive about it. But obviously it took them about a week and a half, I guess, maybe less. I don't know, because I guess some of the news, so the length, and then the quality was good. It was very reminiscent of it. So it made me think a lot of different things. It made me think about copyright, it made me think about speed of velocity, it made me think about niche or fragmentation of content. I don't know. How do you think about that as well? Do you think, maybe another way of saying this is like, how do you think content consumption or IP would change because of AI? Because talking about that larger view, right, of the industry change.
I think to the extreme end, it scares me a little bit, because with the use of that, a certain content will be quite terrifying. It might not reflect the truth, and you'll see a lot more stuff that is just pure, bullshit in that way. And that scares me as a parent, right? Because they browse YouTube and stuff like that. And sometimes you get like weird AI Spider-Man out there that like, it's super weird and it's so freaky. To them, they're like, oh, this is Spider-Man.
It is normal. Yeah.
So I think that's quite terrifying on the extreme end of it. But like any technology development over the last 30 years, it can be used for good too, and the efficiency will be as quick. So how will we manage this so that it doesn't become like a Skynet type of situation? That's one to think about.
We'll make collectibles.
Smarter people.
Yeah, we make collectibles on Skynet, along the way. And I'm kind of curious as well, which is, we also talk about the manufacturing side of things, and if obviously there's this bunch of tariffs. And do you see like an impact on that? I mean, I don't know where your factories are based, but does that, all this trade stuff, does that impact that side of the business?
I think as long as you have any kind of physical products manufactured around the world, you'll be impacted just by varying degrees.
Right.
And your guess is as good as mine, because I mean, who knows when the next tweet is going to come out.
Maybe we change it.
Yeah.
It's all over.
Perhaps, before the end of this recording, I won't be surprised. After all, he did pause it for 90 days at this point. But that said, physical products is just going to be more and more expensive in the long run, which usually implies that, the value of such items will then increase and accumulate, and the desire would then increase as well, because there's assumably much less to go around. And so I think the future of collectibles is going to trend in an upward manner. I also think that it will go into different forms of media eventually. But at this point, this tariff situation is really, what can I say, just you have to diversify, I think, into different channels. Even Lego is doing it, like just by chance. I think they were building a factory in Vietnam to service like Asia, right? And then they have a couple of others on the other side of the world to do that. So I think actively companies are trying to avoid any kind of curveball like this in the future.
Exactly. So I think there's some uncertainty. I think one interesting part I'm kind of curious is, there's obviously a logistics part for your collectibles, right? You know, like do you like do collectibles? I'm just kind of curious here. Is like, do they float in a boat to America or fly in a plane? Like, you know, does it get stopped by customs? I'm just because I've never. I mean, obviously I see the front end of the collectibles, but I'm just curious about this back end, you know, of
Yeah, it's what you imagine. So usually mass products like this in the hundreds of thousands would then go by boat because that's the most price efficient, cost efficient type of way to do it. And funnily, that changed recently. And I read that Apple actually flew like 5 jets worth of iPhones directly to the US so that, you know, it's custom tax but not
yeah.
tariffs in that way. So that might change. They do get checked. In fact, I think art pieces, for whatever reason, interesting fact, like art pieces or statues or anything like that, usually the customs are very suspicious of it. They just feel like you're putting cocaine in them or something like some. Yeah. So more than one time, I have, even when I hand carry it or if we shipped it, sometimes they do open it up, drill a hole in it, smell it just to make sure there's nothing in, and then go on.
Oh no! So now it's
By the time they do it, the value is all like destroyed.
it's like 200 pieces. You're like, oh, 199.
Right.
Because the one got drilled.
They do that. It's yeah.
Wow, I had no idea. Yeah, I mean it's a fair point. I mean, supposedly because the criminal will be like, oh, the art is very sensitive, so
Right?
you shouldn't drill it.
Yeah. Or at an auction and you start bidding like millions for it.
Yeah, so you can claim they shouldn't be drilled, but actually it's hiding. I had no idea
It's
about
a
that.
Netflix drama.
Yeah, Netflix drama. You know, I'm just kind of curious when you look at the future ahead, you know, switching tack a little bit here is like, how do you think you continue to change in the years ahead, right? Because, you know, you've changed a lot over the past 3 years. When you look at, say, the next 3 years in the future, how do you think things will evolve? Like, are you going to become like, I don't know, are you going to use more AI? Are you going to try to become a better dad? I don't know. Like, what kind of aspects do you think you suspect you would change as a person over the next 3 years?
Well, I think I've been focusing a lot on identifying the next generation of talents, and that means a lot of work on delegation. Why delegate that? Because, you know, in the beginning part of a business, if we go all in and you're full on burst, I think that's absolutely like needed. But if you're going for a marathon, which we are because we just love what we do, then you can't be that the whole time, or you just like freaking crash and burn. And so I like to think that in the next 10 years, I'll be already able to just even broader strokes, you know, focus on more broader strokes than I am right now. And you have your trusty group of lieutenants that are able to make very clear-headed decisions just by themselves and be confident that they are empowered to do so. So that is what I hope to. So we started doing a lot of sharing sessions. Like one of them is like, you know, like with Peter Ong, who was chairman ESG, and now he's Pontetland. And he came and talked about like, you know, servant leadership, stuff like that. You know, how do we get our next gen to subscribe to it?
Right. How and what kind of advice would you give to other founders who are becoming more of that, you know, leader position? Any advice you'll give them?
I think be less hard on yourself. And that is very, very difficult to do if you're a founder for X amount of time.
Right.
You know, because everything, it goes back to you, unfortunately, like you're the end of the road.
Right.
And you're the one holding the hot potato, right? So I do meet up my peers as well, other founders on that. And, you know, we're all humans, right? So certain things might hit very hard emotionally, although you know that is the best thing to do for the company.
Right.
And trying to reason it and trying to understand that is for a cause is so important for your well-being. And I never, in the last few years since we met, I always thought that it was like bullshit and all that, and we can just power through everything. Now, no, when going through what I did, it will happen one way or another. But how do you manage it with your support, whether it's your family or your friends or you know, fellow founders?
Yeah.
That was so critical for me, and I see other people go through that as well.
I mean, wouldn't founders sometimes feel like I have to be hard on myself because no one else is going to be hard on me and everybody is counting on me to make this company happen, right? Like
that is how I started thinking, right? You know, I'm the beacon, so everyone must fall in line and support that. But increasingly, I find that having other beacons and allowing them to fail, it could be critical to the growth of the company into much larger than I think it is. So every point of growth, my thinking was just, oh, maybe we're this. But when I talk to someone else and bounce some ideas, it became this, it became that, it became that. And suddenly I became much broader than I ever thought I would be. And that cannot be achieved by a singular person, that literally takes a village to have that mindset. And I find that might be something that you really have to find the right people to do. And it's so difficult in Singapore.
And how do you find them in Singapore or wherever? How do you find the right people from your perspective? I mean,
well, Singapore is a very unique situation because if you're Singaporean, you're local, all you know it's this, and our life is chart for us, right? All the way to HDB and so on and so forth, right? You literally don't have to bother if you're average hardworking. Like you really don't have to worry about it. Your life is chart. But because your life is chart, you never experience extreme failure. You never experience extreme happiness of something, right? But when you look at highly competitive countries, China, Korea, or Japan, it takes a lot for someone in a remote village in China to be assigned a position in Shanghai at that level. So they have to be highly intellect and incredibly hardworking before they can even reach to that point.
Right.
And I realized that heavily when I went and I talked to them, and they're all like way smarter than me and they're way younger than me. And I began to learn, right? And so because of the environment in Singapore in particular, it's a little bit hard because we do everything the school tells us to do, right? So we only know what they teach us, right? And so breaking rules might not come as a norm. But if starting a company is not about breaking rules and breaking the norm, then what is it? What is it? Right? So that's why I think to do that, unfortunately you just have to get the people to the best of your ability, like assess it, through certain tests or and then move on a couple of years journey with them. And I've successfully done that for a few of my most trusted partners in the company.
Yeah. And, I think, you started talking about, how you've changed as a person. And how many years has it been now with the company since you founded it?
13 years.
13 years. Wow. That's such a, huge, more than a decade. So if you had a time travel machine, and you could go back in time to the point where you were founding the company and, you met your younger self at a bar, or coffee, what would you tell him? What advice would you tell him?
Yo, that's easy.
Yeah.
Liquidate everything, pour into Bitcoin. That's what I'll do. Like straight up. Okay. No, because after 13 years, right? Yeah, there are way better ways to make money.
Yeah.
Okay. And investing all of it into Bitcoin is one of those ways. But my point is, if I can amass a much larger capital from the beginning, it will avoid me a lot of pain that I went through.
Right.
I will still create Mighty Jaxx, but I will do it on a much better footing.
Right. So it was a tough time back then. So you would advise your younger self to like be ready for tough times? Or
I think again, I think I go back to the human point, right? Because for me, it has always been true, and this is the truth since we met, which is process and product will always be better. That we always have time to make it better. But with people, it's the most volatile thing that you could have.
right.
And I'll tell myself, like, don't be too hard on emotionally about things, and especially not too invested in it emotionally. I think when you start out, it's usually quite common. It's a family, it's a small team, and you can't help but be invested in that way. Same with whether is it my production partners or IP partners. It gets a little bit closer than is much needed, I would say. Yeah. So emotionally, I need to be stronger, mentally. That's what I'll say. Be prepared for that.
Be prepared. How should people prepare for that? Mentally.
My own advice on that is that it has to be very clear where the decision that you make is stemming from, right? And that it is not a representation of yourself as an individual. Now, it's very hard to convey that to the people that you're dealing with, but you must, at the very least, be clear about that yourself, right? I'm not saying remove empathy entirely. Of course, be empathetic. But if the situation is a stone between the rock and a hard place, then it is what it is, And I find that I'll probably tell myself to get a partner from the get-go too, so that a lot of that energy can be circulating, and then getting a partner is also by itself a challenge.
Of course. Yeah. I think I like what you said about, the decision, where does it come from, right? From you, or is it about a company? And does it mean, I don't know, you to become a Buddhist and meditate and Zen? I'm just saying like how do you do that, right? Because, it's like, oh, this coffee is too hot. I don't want to drink right now, right? This decision is bad. I push back, right? So how do you actually kind of like, yeah.
For what works for other founders that I met, they like to go on silent retreats in the cabin somewhere, and just literally like zen out and remove themselves from that.
Yeah.
I'm sure that helps for some people. I don't think I can take it. So it's not a thing that I do. But rather I focus a lot more on after work hours, being more approachable, right? Being myself after that. So that people can understand who I am as a person.
Yeah.
But they know that before that, during day, there is no malicious attempt.
Yeah.
I don't mean sarcasm. I don't mean anything.
Right.
It is just purely that if it's good, it's good. If it's not, then it's not.
Yeah.
So that is something that is more, I think, culturally it has to develop in the company. And you need that people team to preach that in that way.
Yeah. I think that's actually a very good point, because I think one thing that's disappeared with like hybrid or remote work is that separation of the work and the personal self, right? Because, when you're remote online, it's all work, right? And then you don't have that, I don't know what's the word, outside work,
Yeah. The outside
personal
work
self. And then, so I'm just like working with, I don't know, Jeremy, the
different.
bad guy, versus like, oh, Jeremy's a cool dude who's a bit of a nerd,
Well, I mean, from very long ago, I think there was one thing that stuck with me, which is like good, bad, good, right? So you cushion like a small sandwich of sort, right? If it's something good, the bad comes in, and something good to round it up. That often helped me a lot.
Yeah, exactly. And the same thing for getting to know people as well. On that note, thank you so much for sharing your point of view. I'd love to summarize the 3 big takeaways. First of all, thanks so much for, I think, sharing about what's changed over the past few years for you, especially in terms of how you change as a leader, how you change as a person, in terms of how you lead and manage your teams. Secondly, thanks so much for sharing about, how the collectible industry works. I think what are the emotional drivers, what are the personas, what are the trends that are happening, and how a business like yours works all the way from creation to, kind of like production, to logistics, to getting through customs, and to eventually selling. So that was a very fascinating insight. And lastly, thanks so much for sharing, I think, about your own personal, I think, evolution. I would say from a founder to a leader, right? And part of that delegation, about that talent spotting, about being able to work with a room of creators where, their tastes are more, in line with today and the future versus your own, and being able to let go and kind of like let other beacons shine as well. So on that note, thank you so much for sharing.
Thanks, Jeremy. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to Brave. If you enjoyed this episode, please share the podcast with your friends and colleagues. We would also appreciate you leaving a rating or review. Head over to www.bravesea.com for member content, resources, and community. Stay well and stay brave.